This week on the Stereo Image, we're lucky enough to have the great Marc Myers with us. Marc is a columnist for the Wall Street Journal, the guy that invented JazzWax back in 2007, and writes about music. And music is really in his life at every level. So welcome, Marc. Thank you for coming on.
Great to be with you, Mike. Thanks a lot for having me on.
Well, I'm excited. You're a guest. I'm really, I've been looking forward to this because I love all your stuff. And one of the things that I love about all the JazzWax stuff is that it's really educational. You delve so deeply into all these topics and all these people that, and it's not really, I've never seen anything like criticism. I don't think of you as a critic of the music. I think of you sort of as an explainer. And I love that about all your writing.
Yeah, my feeling on that, Mike, is, but JazzWax just returned. I mean, returned from the dead. It's just an amazing 3-week period with 3 JazzWax readers who happen to have different specialties, and the 4 of us were able to move it completely over to Substack and set up a whole new system. But for me, art is hard. Music's hard. Creating is hard. Artists, whether I like their music or not, don't need me to make their life more miserable. My job is not to have fun at their expense, but I've always viewed my job as the person whose taste readers respect, and that if I like something, then I write about it. And if I don't like something, I don't bother writing about it. And that allows me to give readers what they really want and spare the artist turmoil.
Right. Well, it's really wonderful. And I mean, to go on about JazzWax a little more, because obviously I subscribed because I've been an avid reader.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Oh, I know, it's my pleasure. And I mean, for that quality of stuff. And I mean, you've been supportive of everyone that I know for years and years. And I look forward to it every day. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, geez, who's he talking about now? And,
that's a joy.
And it also, for me personally, like you'll pull out someone that I haven't thought of in 20 years. A great recording, and also like when the Bill Evans unreleased stuff started coming out, all these things get me to listen to stuff that I've sort of buried in my collection, and I pull it back out.
I sort of see myself in that regard, Mike, as the sad thing about today, if there is a sad thing, that kids don't have radio stations anymore,
right?
The way I did anyway in the 60s. You're only 28, so you don't go back. You may remember what I'm talking about.
They
don't have the guys in the record store who know everything about everything, and you can kind of come in and say, I heard this guy on the radio playing. I only got his last name. It sounded something like this, and then they take you right over to the bin and pull out 6 albums you should buy. And so for me, I feel like I'm replacing those entities where if somebody doesn't know much about jazz, they can learn, or at least through my taste, they can get a sense of what they might like, and then they can go from there. Or it's to, I guess, impress people like you who know a lot. But if I can pull a rabbit out of a hat, if I can find an album you're unfamiliar with and didn't know it existed, and I can get that wow email, like, wow, I didn't even know about that. Then, I've done a good day's work for JazzWax.
Well, it really is an incredible resource for everyone. And I believe that I'm not sure who told me about it. Maybe Neil Tesser or somebody that I respected back in probably early on, like 2008 or so is when I first.
Terry Teach Out.
Oh yeah, Terry. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Terry. I just lost a friend to Tony Fitzpatrick, a great artist in Chicago, passed away the other day, and he was waiting for a double lung transplant, and I brought to mind Terry's story and just how awful that whole thing was. um,
Well, you don't miss people until you want to tell them something and realize that they're not on the other end of an email.
right.
Uh,
Right.
people are, there's 100 people in your life or more than that or less than that. But, friends who pass, and they pass prematurely or suddenly, um, you know, you
Yeah.
grieve and it burns off. But then there's suddenly something that you wish you could share with that person, and they're no
Sure.
longer on the other end. So
Yeah.
it happens a lot with me and Terry.
Oh man. Well, it happened, obviously it happened with my mom, because my mom passed away in like May of 2001. And on September 11th, the first person I wanted to call was her, and she wasn't there. So, but anyhow, that's a little off topic, but that's fine. But I was going to say, to keep on JazzWax a little bit more, even though I mean, it's obviously a huge part of what you do, but you do so much more. You sort of guide people's curiosity with JazzWax if they say, "Oh, I never heard of Tubby Hayes," and that's what I miss about stores like Tower, and there was a great used record. I worked at a used record store in Boston, and there was a great used record store called Looney Tunes, which is right down the street from Berklee College of Music. I first really got into Wynton Kelly from going to that store, and they were pulling out all these things besides Wynton playing with Miles that I hadn't heard. And I'll tell you a funny story. There's a great avant-garde saxophone player named Alan Chase, who plays in Boston, who taught at Berklee. And he looked like a math teacher. He was probably in his late 20s at the time, early 30s. This is the mid 80s. And just a ferocious out sax player. Really, really explorative and exciting. And we got to be friends, and I said, what happened to you? You look like you should be playing Paul Desmond licks, and you're just exploding with this stuff. And he said, when I was 11 years old, my mom and dad got me a saxophone. I wanted to learn listen to saxophone players. And my mother went to the record store and asked the record clerk what her 11-year-old son should hear about playing on the saxophone. And he sold her a John Coltrane and Pharoah Sanders Live in Seattle album. And he said that changed his whole life. So it's important. What I'm trying to say is, for guys like you, and I mean, that void has been left there. Yes, there is the great thing of Spotify and Apple Music to have almost everything at your fingertips. But if you don't know what to look for, it's not easy. And to have JazzWax there to just open those doors, it's a public service you're doing.
Thanks very much.
So let me ask you this. How did you where was music in your life before this kind of stuff? I mean, when you were growing up, did you have a lot of music around your house, or were you just like a regular radio listener, like as you said, or when did you start realizing like music in general, not jazz, but just music was something that you really spoke to you?
I think that started probably in keep in mind, I grew up during a great period of time. I grew up in the 60s. So, my first memories are the Beatles, So I've had music coming at me through AM radio, through car radios, through events, through, it's on television. Music was ever present in the 1960s. And once the Beatles arrived in 64, it was pretty steady British invasion.
Mm-hmm.
So music starts back then. If this were the 1960s, you wouldn't even ask that question. It wouldn't make any sense.
Right.
It only makes sense because today there's so many diversions. How do people get into music today? Everybody I knew was into music. Music was everywhere. It was coming at you 7 different ways, and all of it was very good, whether it was TV theme songs or 45s or the record store. It was ever present.
Right. And well, yeah, sure. I remember, going with your friends to the record store and bringing a record home and just listening to it and playing it to death was just part of life.
As far as music goes, that continued into junior high school, where I met Billy Taylor, whose trio. I grew up in New York, in Manhattan.
Mhm.
So Billy Taylor's trio showed up and played for the audience there. Television, as far as jazz goes, was inundated, whether it was Mannix or Mission Impossible with Lalo Schifrin or any of the other shows. They were all jazzy theme songs.
Uh-huh.
And then jazz just became more interesting to me in the late 1960s, probably because hard rock was a bit caustic for me. I just didn't find it melodic enough. And also, I wasn't really part of the drug culture. And then my parents moved us to northern Westchester out of New York about an hour and a half because they couldn't
Mhm.
afford private school in the city, and the schools had gotten so bad. So I was suddenly in the middle of nowhere, and music became my best friend.
Mhm.
In effect, my brother, who's 3 years younger, took to the country like a cat to milk. But for me, I hated being out of the city. So records for me became something that I spent a lot of time with rather than people. When I was
Uh-huh.
at Northeastern, which was a work study college,
Yep.
it was a radical concept back then. Today, every college should be doing it. It was 5 years instead of four, and you
Mhm.
worked throughout college. You would be in school one semester, then you'd be working the next semester, and then back in school, and then work, and on and off. And I had the good fortune of interviewing at the New York Times in my second part of my freshman year. So it's second semester. I
Wow.
interviewed at the New York Times and I got the job.
Mhm.
Um, and I worked for the New York Times all through college and wrote for the New York Times all through college. So that by the time I graduated in 79, I went to college in 74. By 79, I had more experience than most of my professors.
Wow. And
And yes, to answer your question, I brought my stereo system to college and
well,
crates of records, which
sure.
included a lot of soul and a
Mhm.
lot of jazz.
Wow. And I'll touch on that in a minute. But in Boston, did you get to go to clubs like Wally's and those places around Northeastern
I
and
spent a lot of time at the Jazz Workshop and Paul's Mall,
Halls Mall? Yeah.
mostly. But then disco arrived in Boston, and then I was basically out at discos from Wednesday to Saturday. I mean, it
Really?
was an incredible phenomenon. Yeah, I mean the music. People who didn't experience it back then wouldn't realize that disco revolutionized production. That you could
Mhm.
listen to music on your stereo, and no matter how good your stereo was, it sounded two-dimensional. At
Right.
discos with sound systems there and production on records improved, it was just a stunning experience to go to a place and dance and have the music sound almost lifelike. So
Right.
that sort of took over. But I didn't stop listening to jazz. It's just that I was suddenly listening to jazz and disco a lot.
Right. Backing up a little bit, what was your exposure to jazz as opposed to pop music when you were young, like your first jazz albums?
I think jazz for me probably started with the big bands because I used to listen quite a bit to an AM radio station where there was an older guy who had been around for ages, for decades,
Mhm.
and knew everything about Glenn Miller and Tommy Dorsey and Duke Ellington and Jimmy Lunsford and all these
Right.
guys. He would play all those 78s and listen to a lot of that. But then I started listening, once I got an FM radio, I started listening to WRVR in New York, which was the jazz station, big
Mhm.
jazz station in New York. And that sort of turned me on to music I didn't know. A fellow by the name of Ed Beach used to host a show called Just Jazz. He had one of the coolest DJ voices, older guy. And
Mhm.
he would do like hour shows on, or two-part hour shows on Eddie Lockjaw Davis or Sonny Stitt.
Wow.
And once you got one of the once you could consume a show like that, you had a list of about 6 albums that you wanted to go down, for me to go down to New York, go to a record store and buy something and come home with
Right.
it.
Right. Wow.
It was
And
just more satisfying, Mike. It was just, I don't know, rock by the late 1960s, early 70s was kind of drug music. I
Mhm.
never got why the Doors were as special, as they were back
Yeah.
then. They sounded tremendously boring and simple, and
Yeah.
a lot of the other bands just sounded loud and noisy. And for me, jazz just sounded, my ear could hear more information. And I guess my intellect, was such that jazz just satisfied that side of me and made me feel good. I don't know how else to
Right.
put it.
Wow. No, I mean, it's very well put because, as a kid, before I went to Berkeley, but when I was still in Buffalo playing,
When were you in Berkeley, by the way?
um, 81 to 85.
Got it. So
Um,
you're there just after I
so
leave.
just after you left Boston. Yeah. But, I would have kids that, worshiped Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page and people like that. Um, and I certainly heard plenty of it and enjoyed some of it, but I would play them a Joe Pass record because they thought they were good guitar players.
Right.
And to watch the lights go on in their head to say, "Oh, wait a minute, this is impossible. How could he be doing this?" And
Right.
it's there's some aspect of that because as you say, how long can you listen to two chords over and over in a drug induced state of a 20-minute second side of an album?
The irony, of course, today is that I write a rock column for the Wall Street Journal.
I know.
But what's so much fun about it is a lot of the music is sort of, I mean, I know the album and I know the history, but it's a new experience. I feel like I'm
Mhm.
covering something completely new because it's not something I followed or digested thoroughly at the time.
Right.
But I know all the albums I'm writing about. I mean, just to be clear, I'm not.
Oh,
When I say this, it's not like, oh, I'm just picking things out of the air to write about.
right.
So I know music history cold and rock history cold.
Mhm.
So but for me, the deep dive into rock is an interesting one for me because it's a fresh. It's not like I'm picking up albums that are worn out for me and I can't hear it again. It's a new
Mhm.
experience, which is kind of funny. I get to sort of appreciate what I should have been appreciating in my youth, but I get to appreciate it now in hindsight.
Yeah. Well, it's really great because the stuff that you're writing about now, the musicianship is still, it still holds up. I mean, none of these guys that played in bands like, Leonard Skinner or none of them were highly technically proficient musicians, but they were all really good. And they all had ideas that they brought to the music that you can look back on 20 years later. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say though, out of the jazz universe, like 90% of the music in the 1950s is great. Maybe
Mhm.
60% in the 1960s is great. But with rock, I would say of all of rock, it's really 30% is good, and then
Mhm.
probably 15% is great. It's a much
Right.
smaller universe. So I wouldn't write about Leonard Skinner, but I
No.
would write about Patti Smith or Paul Simon or
Oh,
Carly Simon.
sure. What I'm saying is if like for myself, I mean, this is just an example of, I never paid any attention to Leonard Skinner. I mean, why would you? It was just around on FM radio. They'd play, Give Me Three Steps and a few other Leonard Skinner songs. But then I heard a track. I'm only bringing this up because I just heard it a couple weeks ago, and their piano player was really good. I
Interesting.
mean, he was playing some stuff, and I was like, this is much better than I remembered it,
Well, I
So
mean, you're such a wonderful pianist. So, if you're
um,
saying that, I'm going to go back and listen because I know what's respect for you.
well, thanks, but it was just more like it was like another level of Jerry Lee Lewis, who I loved. You know what I mean? I respected. I certainly not his personal life, but
I spent an afternoon with Jerry Lee down at his ranch
oh, really? What was that about?
in
How
the
was
Wall Street
that?
Journal. That was a lot of fun.
And this was how many years ago?
Must have been 2012 or 13,
Okay.
a while ago.
Wow.
Yeah. Jerry in his bathrobe, but I did ask him to sit at the piano and show me how he did his runs on the piano, which he did. And then I
Really?
tried it. Yeah. It was funny. I got a piano lesson from Jerry Lee Lewis.
Oh man, that's something. Well, when I was a little kid, he was a hero because he was a rock star
Where did you grow up?
at Buffalo, New York.
Okay.
I mean, he was him, Fats Domino, those guys. I loved, I mean, I grew up with player pianos in my house and listening to Fats Waller and Art Tatum.
Fats Domino I asked Fats Domino what I wanted to feel what his triplets sounded like. I wanted to feel it. So he put he put his fingers on the top of the back of my hand, and he played the back of my hand like a piano.
Really?
So that I could feel what those triplets were like.
Yeah. Man, I mean, and just amazing chops too. I mean, to be able to do that. And is it true that the nicest guy in the world? Everyone that I've ever talked to about Fats Domino.
He was a real teddy bear. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know if that was the case when he was in his 20s.
Right.
You know, back when I interviewed him in 2012, I think, you know, he was older, but at the same time, he still was a showman, which doesn't really exist anymore in the true sense.
Yeah, it's true. It's funny what, like, all of the older jazz musicians that I've met, you know, the legends over the years, they all had this sort of sense of decorum and were polite and friendly. And I never met any of the, you know, the ill-tempered Miles Davis reputation types. You know what I mean? Like the guys that, you know, Clark Terry and even Jerry Mulligan, who had a horrible reputation, I guess, in his youth, was like the sweetest guy in the world, you know? And I don't know if it came with just maturity and being just knowing who they were as people and understanding what they brought to the music. But all of the guys, Flip Phillips, you know, the vibes player with the great bands, he's still alive. He's 100 years old.
You're talking about Terry Gibbs.
Terry Gibbs, yeah. Just the sweetest people in the world, you know? And
well, you know, there comes a point, Mike, in their lives where work slows up and they start to realize that you pay their salary.
There is a truth to that. Absolutely.
You know, for years, the problem jazz musicians have always had and still have today is that they don't think they're entertainers. Anybody who stands on a stage and does anything is, by definition, an entertainer. But jazz has always had this cool space carved out for itself. And while that sort of is okay when you're very young and you're in the 1940s and 50s, how do I put this? The people who understood the power of an audience better than anybody were Bird and Diz. You know, Charlie. Right. I've never read anything about Charlie Parker that said he was mean to people who came up to him to learn about him or to thank him for his music. And having met Dizzy, he always understood that his job was to entertain an audience. Right. And if you look at any of the major people, any of the biggest names in jazz, they knew they were entertainers. Yes. And they were always friendly to audiences. You know, I don't know, you know, I never met Miles Davis. I don't know what his story was or what his problem was beyond a point. But those were different times, you know, civil rights movement. And there's a lot of bitterness and there's a strong sense of injustice. And, you know, you can't put everything through the filter of, hey, you're an entertainer. But for the most part, the top jazz musicians have always understood that the audience pays their rent and buys their records and tells their friends. And those who don't get that suddenly don't understand why nobody's coming to see them. Right. You're a performer entertainer. I mean, you know, and you're a great pianist. I mean, when you play, I mean, you must have audience members who linger and want to say hi or. Oh, sure. Well, I mean, it's a very different thing. But I've heard that you're really mean to them. No, I'm just kidding. Oh, thanks. Yeah. Well, I'm sure you're as nice as can be to them. I am. I mean, I try. It's no effort. You know, I mean, they're nice enough to talk to me. But the thing is, I'm in a really weird position, not a weird position, a unique position, because I identify as a jazz pianist, you know, and I've been in show business for 24 years with Penn and Teller, where it's a different thing.
although I'm lucky enough to only play music I want to play that I've written for the show and play jazz standards that I love with Penn before the show. And so I'm not making any, I'm not having to compensate for anything. I'm not missing out on anything.
The only person with a better job than you is the Supreme Court Justice, Mike.
Yeah, and they got a lot of work to do. But I mean, it's funny because someone came up to me after the Penn and Teller show and said, "Oh, I saw Gray Sargent with Tony Bennett on the East Coast," and I mentioned your name because I worked with Gray a lot, and he was a dear friend. And he said Gray said best gig in jazz, Mike Jones, best gig in jazz. And I mean, it is true. I'm very, very lucky, and I get to do things that I never thought I would do, like write music for an extended run on Broadway and things like that. But the fact is, Penn always says it's one show business, which is, whether you're a clown at a kid's birthday party or you're headlining Carnegie Hall, it's, people are wanting to see you, and they'll be an audience for you if you do, and so you respect them.
Well, that's the problem, though, today with jazz, is that many musicians came up thinking that they should be aloof and remote.
Yes.
And that's largely why jazz is not, I guess, after barbershop quartets comes jazz, right? Popularity. I mean, all major media has given up covering jazz, so they don't even cover it anymore. And it's unfortunate. But at the same time, jazz suffers today from two general problems. One is the musician's inability to be an entertainer. Mm-hmm. I don't mean talk to the audience. I just mean bring some charisma, charm, and personality to the performance. And second, increasingly, the music that I'm hearing doesn't have a narrative. It almost sounds like incidental music in a movie. Mm-hmm. And I don't think jazz musicians were trained to tell a story through their music and through their improvisation. Standards tell a story because that's what they were designed to do. But I don't think the musician understands that you really do have to tell a story with your improvisation. I mean, if I just turned in words to my editor at the Wall Street Journal, and they were all over the place, well, 4 people would read it instead of 4 million, right?
Right.
So I have an obligation to tell a story when I'm writing, and everybody has to tell a story if they want to succeed, because that's how you get people to stay tuned to what you're doing. But I don't think musicians today realize that they can do whatever they want, but then the audience can do whatever they want too.
Right. Yes.
Which means not showing up.
Right.
And that's what's happened today.
I mean, I'm a throwback. The guys that I admire have all been dead for 50 years now. But I mean, that's not to say that there aren't musicians out today that I enjoy, but I hardly ever need to hear someone's original music in a jazz setting. You know what I mean? I want to hear something that pulls me in, and then I can say, "Oh yeah."
I mean, I don't think you can do that as a blanket statement, because certainly Alan Broadbent and Georgia Mascio, with their 3 songbooks that they, lyrics by Georgia and music by Alan. Well, that's all original music, and it's better than half the songbook stuff that I've heard. I think what we're saying is the same thing, which is you be boring at your own risk.
Right.
If your original music is boring, then you've basically ensured that audiences are.
I misspoke. What I meant is if a 25-year-old kid that's playing 2 chords for a half an hour and calling it an original composition, it doesn't speak to me. But Alan Broadbent, I love that stuff.
They can do that. That's they're entitled to create anything they want. My point is that the person who spends money or writes about it or shows up in clubs doesn't have to go. Right. And then the jazz musician gets very angry that nobody's showing up. And they get very angry that their albums don't sell. And they get very angry that they don't have a producer because the small record company won't give them a producer. And they're very angry that maybe spend a little less time being angry and a little more time trying to connect with music that will That I'm not arguing for jazz musicians to be commercial. That's not what I'm
No,
saying. But the problem with a lot of jazz musicians today, I find, because I get everything,
right,
and I would say 90% of the music that I get goes in a shopping bag and gets put out.
right.
So, and I listen to, I do give each album I get a chance.
Mhm.
But if there's no attempt to, part of the problem is many jazz musicians, they aren't curious. They don't look to the past. They don't listen to older stuff.
Mhm.
A lot
Mhm.
of singers just sing the same songs. Everybody's singing over and over again. Um,
Right,
you want to sing Cole Porter? Great. Why don't you find some Cole Porter nobody knows?
right.
Why don't you go to the archives? Why don't you pull out like all 500 of his songs? And why don't you
Mhm.
pick 3 Cole Porter songs that nobody knows? And why don't you do those?
Right.
Um, do something different. But a lot of jazz musicians, a lot of singers do the same thing over and over again,
Mhm.
in terms of standards. And a lot of jazz musicians seem to think that being out there, and doing their own thing is the way to go. And I'm saying power to you, but don't complain when nobody's there.
Right, right. That makes, I mean, it's
Like I said, it's like me turning in words. They're not in sentences, they're just words. And
right.
then I'm getting upset because nobody's reading me.
Nobody's reading it. Right. No, it's true. I mean, Zoot Sims, somebody was saying, going on about his playing, and he basically said, I just try to play little melodies that sound good to me. I'm trying to tell a story, and that's the whole
But
point of,
they don't teach that. That's the problem. I had wishes for jazz musicians, and believe me, I love any jazz music, any jazz. I write about new music, but like
Mhm,
I said, it takes 80 CDs to finally find something that I like.
mhm,
In fact, I think my post tomorrow will probably be a whole group of like 6 or 7 or 8 new albums that I think are really terrific. So
uh-huh,
I love jazz and I love jazz musicians. I just wish more of them would roll up their sleeves and do the work,
right,
meaning do the research, look into the music, find music that is worth doing. If you're going to do a tribute album, try somebody new who hasn't been done before or
mhm,
someone who's off the beaten trail. If you're going to improvise, work on the improvisation before the recording
mhm,
session. Maybe you should tell a story. And what I mean by telling a story is just buy any Miles Davis, Hank Mobley,
right.
Sonny Rollins,
Tony Rollins, yeah,
Stan Getz, buy any of their albums, and Stan Getz tells a story. I
right,
mean, that's what
right,
he's doing in his improvisation. That's what any of
yeah,
these guys are doing. So it's not enough to be able to improvise. You actually have to tell a story.
right,
Play something, improvise that's coherent, that will catch people's hearts and will awaken their souls.
right.
So I wish that, and I also wish that they would spend a little more time being engaging with an audience. Could be after the show, could be
Yeah,
whenever. Uh, Notion that jazz musicians should be aloof and should be detached.
it always rubbed me the wrong way, and it's not been my, I mean, of course,
It's just not good. It's just not good for business. I'm not even arguing from a stylistic point. I'm saying
right. No,
I would like jazz musicians to be rich, and I would like
me
them to
too.
be comfortable, and I'd like for their parents to stop nagging them about what they plan on doing for work and stop asking for money.
Right,
So the way to do that is to be more engaged, is to build an audience, to be engaging, and to work harder at winning people over without being commercials. Be yourself, but at the same
right,
time, make a greater effort to be different and engaging.
right.
I mean, again, I'm sure someone's going to come back and yell at me in email, but my criticism doesn't come from malice. My criticism comes from love. I would love more of them to be better, but I wish they would understand that being better isn't playing faster or
Right.
longer.
Mhm.
It's saying more in a shorter period of time.
Yeah, and being polite and engaging with the audience and all of those things. Uh, just to put a pin in this, because I want to ask you about a few other things, but everything that you're saying is so right on. And I will also point out that I'm a little bit younger than you, but not much. And I've sort of me and the generation after me are the last generations that got to experience playing with the masters, that were around in the 40s and 50s, the guys that started what I consider mainstream jazz and bebop. And I mean, I got to play with Clark Terry and Flip Phillips and sat in with Jerry Mulligan and I don't think it's a problem, but one of the differences of kids today, and I'm now on my old man phase, is they're studying that music one step removed from the way we learned it. I learned how to behave on a bandstand by watching Herb Pomeroy and Dick Johnson and all these guys that knew, I played with Tom Lindsay. Yeah, I don't know if you know who Tom Lindsay was.
No.
Tom Lindsay is the trumpet player on Coleman Hawkins' recording of Body and Soul. The actual seminal recording of Body and Soul, Tom Lindsay was the trumpet player on it. And I played with him 6 nights a week in Boston. He was in his late 70s. And, just learning from them by being around them, all the kids today are learning the way you would learn classical music, Beethoven. They're reading about it in school and they're learning about it, but there's recordings, which of course, Beethoven never recorded to my knowledge. But you know what I mean? They have a leg up with the recordings that exist, but they're not having that. They're not being on the bandstand with Louis Bellson and hearing stories about Louis, in the 50s and 60s. And I think that some of that's missing too. And it's sort of like a void. It doesn't give them the same respect for not for the music, but for the tradition of the music and the way that you treat people and an audience member and how you carry yourself and without being aloof. And I think it's just, maybe that's part of the new era, but I agree with you that people were likable. You go out and buy their CD if you like them, or you buy their record,
Yeah.
If you see them and they're a dipshit, you don't bother. But meanwhile, while we're talking jazz, because I know you've got so many other elements that I want to talk about, but how did the How Jazz Happen book, what spurred you to start doing that?
I was on the phone with Nat Hentoff one day. Nat used to call me all the time because he's a big JazzWax reader. And he's extremely enthusiastic guy. So whenever he read a great post, he'd call me up and go on and on. But I ran the idea for the book by him, which was an unusual concept, the unusual way to approach jazz. Why Jazz Happens, of course, doesn't argue that jazz changes because different musicians show up in town, but that external forces were the reason why jazz changed as many times as it did for a variety of reasons. But Nat said, that's a phenomenal idea. You've got to write that. And he called his editor and he had me call the editor. And 3 days later, I got a contract.
Wow. And how long did it take to work on it?
That was a year.
And then the Anatomy of a Song books, the first one came out like 4 years ago now?
I think 2016.
Oh, Jesus. That's another thing that happens as I get older. It's like things that I think of.
Time flies.
Yeah, I know. No, there's tricks in the show, in the Penn and Teller show. And I'll say to Zeke, oh yeah, that trick went in like what, 3 years ago? He goes, it's been in for a decade, And I'm like, Jesus, it still seems new to me, But well, 2016, because I bought it when it first came out. I was all excited because I was at, it had to be that era because there were still bookstores.
So sweet.
But that was when there was still a bookstore in Las Vegas, Barnes and Noble. I don't think. But it's the care that you take in doing these deep dives into this, in the way that it's sort of an overarching theme. I mean, even when you're doing your celebrity things, you have this.
Talking about the house call column that I interview Hollywood A-listers for.
Yes. When you're doing that, you always have the right amount of deference and respect.
Thank you.
You do. It's really refreshing. It's, as I said, it's so nice. One of the things that I love about you is you don't talk shit about people. You know what I mean? As you said at the beginning, it's not your job and it's hard enough. So it's really refreshing.
Mike, art's hard, and it's not for me to make it harder. You
Right.
know, And I also have the luxury at the Journal of interviewing people who I feel are exceptional. So I come to it with I come to them with an enormous amount of respect
Right.
to begin with. It makes it easier.
Yeah, because I mean, Penn will not read anything with his name in it, because he believes that it colors, his act, whatever it was 50 years ago. I mean, this is their 50th anniversary. He was given the very sage advice, never read a review, because if the guy really liked you, you'll try to do more of that the next night. If the guy didn't like you, you'll try to correct it the next night.
You know how all the tricks are done?
Well, I may. I can't say for sure. I'm just a piano player. As I often say, I say 9 times out of 10, a D minor 7th chord goes to a G. That's
Yeah.
what I know.
Okay.
But I mean, it would be unusual if after 25 years of being in almost every rehearsal, I didn't have some idea. But that was the advice that he was given, and he's stuck to that. As far as I know, he never reads anything with his name in it. But I would read reviews, especially when I was younger, because I wanted to know if I was any good. And there was always this one reviewer, and I won't mention his name, I found it to be of other reviewers, critics, that they will praise a record tremendously or a performance, but then they have to get one dig in. You know what I mean? They have to have one niggling thing that bothered them.
Like a suck up, Mike.
Right. Yeah, sure. But I noticed, but you don't do that. You just lay it out.
But if I'm writing it depends upon what I'm doing. I write for the review section. So review by definition is a review.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm writing about an album from 50 years ago that is exceptional and there's a song that's no good, I'll say so. But 50 years later, nobody's feelings
are going to be hurt.
Their feelings are hurt, and they really need.
Yeah.
Then they have other issues.
Yeah, I got a call from the estate of Lee Morgan. They're very upset that you didn't like that track. 50 years later, it's not going to matter. But I'm going to ask you, what's next? What are you doing now? What's on the agenda? What's on the horizon besides keeping JazzWax going for all of us needy people?
Well, JazzWax makes up an hour and a half of my day. The bulk of my day is taken up with my house call column for the Wall Street Journal, in which I interview A-list Hollywood actors. Mm-hmm. And then my monthly column for review, the Arts and Review section, Album at 50, which looks at an album that's celebrating a 50th anniversary that changed the history of music. That's an essay that I write on that album. I do obit writing on major stars for them on Deadline, and I also write other things for the arts section. So wow. I've got a lot going on.
Yeah, clearly. Do you have any other book projects that you're eyeballing?
No, not really. I wrote 5 books. I'm kind of like, it's not that interesting to me anymore. And besides, I don't know that. I think the number of people who are reading books is declining. And I also find that of all the things that I want to do at my stage in life, last on the list is to spend 6 to 8 years writing a book.
Right. Well, I think you've got, you certainly, I will say this completely separate from everything else. You certainly have the best hair of anyone I've ever met. I mean, as I can tell you, I am incredibly jealous. And the fact that you look 20 years younger than me and are indeed a couple of years older is just sad.
Just a couple now. Just a couple.
Yeah. I mean, you're like 69, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I'm 63. So,
okay, there you go. But, Brian, you're looking pretty young now. So
I feel I act like a child. So I sort of.
There you go. Young.
Yeah, I always say I want to make it to 100 so I can break even. But I saw Tony Bennett out here when he was 90, and he sang. He brought the house down. And was just singing great.
He's a wonderful guy. I really miss him. I interviewed him 5 times.
Wow.
His art studio in his home 3 times. And I'll never forget the last interview when we were leaving. He already had Alzheimer's. I was the last person to interview him.
Wow.
Because they were cutting off media because he just couldn't remember things.
Yeah.
But I remember his memory when I interviewed him was still good, but not perfect. And his person was there, his publicist, who was very sharp and could goose him into remembering if he had to. But I remember going down in the elevator with him. It was a very tight elevator on Central Park South with his publicist, and the three of us were in there, and I see him looking at me, and he said, "I love when we get together and you do these interviews with me." And it was like, I knew it was the last time, you know, the last time. His studio was on the corner of 6th Avenue, and his apartment building was 2 buildings over. So it's a very short walk. And as we walked to the building, he started to go up the steps. The publicist said goodbye to me, but he was going up the 5 steps or so that led into the building. And the publicist went to go with him, and he looks back at me, and he comes down the steps, and he came over to me, and we had a moment there.
Yeah.
And I just knew that I was never going to see him. I was never going to be with him again. And it was just a very touching, he was a very soulful guy, always had his eye on the commercial aspects of what he had to do.
Mm-hmm.
But he was always someone who loved art and jazz.
Yeah.
And always felt strongly that the music was exceptional because it had to be invented night after night. And that wasn't something he did, although he would certainly have jazz in his articulation and his phrasing, but to improvise and to do what great jazz musicians did had always impressed him. It was always something very special. But he was a very, very precious guy when you had quiet time with him or you had conversation with him. And I miss him.
Yeah. I mean, my Tony Bennett stories, and I have a couple, but one I'll bore you with now is I was at the This just goes to show what a memory he had, which is stunning to me. So I'm at the Copley Plaza watching Dave McKenna, and I would go to see Dave McKenna. I had a gig at the Ritz-Carlton in Boston 5 nights a week.
What year was this?
This was probably 85, 86.
So this is the merry-go-round bar, right?
No, it was when they turned it into the Plaza Bar.
Oh, okay.
And I was at the Ritz, and my gig ended at 9. I think it was like 5 to 9 or 7 to 11. And then I would run over down the street to the Plaza Bar to see Dave from 11 to 1 every night. And he was there every night, 5 nights a week, and then he would take the summers off. And I was in there with Ron Della Chiesa. I'm assuming you know who Ron was.
Yeah, the DJ, right?
Yeah, he had Music America show, and he'd had me on his show a few times. And I was on this TV show in Boston called The Nancy Merrill Show. And so anyways, I would go down every night. It was like a lesson. You know, I couldn't figure out what he was doing, but that's all I cared about was Dave McKenna and solo piano and figuring out the walking bass lines and all that stuff. And Dave, so I'm in there with Ron, and Ron is in there with Tony Bennett, who had been singing with the Boston Pops that night. And he introduces me, and Tony was very gracious. He says, "Oh, Ron says you're a great player." And I said, "Oh, thanks. You know, yeah, it's great to see you." And then I left them alone. You know, I'm not going to impose myself on them. And now I swear this happened. This is not made up. Maybe this was probably in April or May. Flash forward to probably October of that year. I walk in the Plaza Bar. Dave's playing that night, but he's on a break. And I walk in, and Tony Bennett is sitting on one of those sofas by himself. And he looks up and says, "Hey, Mike, how you doing?" Now, how could he possibly have remembered meeting me? You know what I mean?
There you go.
To make it a long story longer, you know, he wound up coming over to the piano and doing Little Girl Blue with me. And then he told me to call his agent, who, this was before Danny was handling him. He had a guy named Roger Vorse or something. And he told me to call him, and he says, "Why don't you go to New York?" And, you know, and he was really, but just the sweetest guy in the world, you know? And again, understanding that he's an entertainer, to wrap it all back around, you know? Get from that golden age. Well, anyways, I'm going to, even though I could tug on your ear for more and more time,
No, you can't, because my editor wants me.
All right. Well, there you go. But I just can't thank you enough, Marc, for doing this. It's really been great. And
My pleasure, Mike. It was great chatting with you. All we missed was a fireplace.
That's true. It's true. And as I said, it's just, I just want people to talk about music and how much they like it and what.
I think people watching this should buy your albums. I think they should enjoy your music because you're special.
Oh, thank you.
That the best gig in the business, or the best gig in jazz, as they say, you got to do it not because you were lucky. You got to do it because you can.
Oh, thank you. Well, I really appreciate it. And we're trying to get the word out about the Big Stereo Image podcast. If you have a chance, please join our monthly email list over at thestereoimage.com or follow us on Instagram or Threads at the.stereo.image. Absolutely follow us. Don't even bother with the damn mailing list. Just follow us. Tell all your friends, too.